In our journey through the wilderness, we've stopped along the way to learn some valuable lessons on the subject of spiritual maturity. We've gleaned those from the experiences of the ancient Israelites as they walked through that place 3,200 years ago. Like us, they were on their way from bondage to freedom, from spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity. That involves responsibility and eventually learning authority. God taught them, as He often teaches us, through literal experiences. He brought them from the waters of the Red Sea, where they experienced a great miracle, to a place of desolation at the waters of Marah. From there, they traveled to the beautiful oasis of Elim, where they found about God's loving provision. Then on to the valley of Rephidim, where Moses, you remember, struck the rock. At that place, God was setting the stage for what was going to happen the next day. It was important that these former slaves learn the truth of submission, authority, because the next day the Israelites were going to face a challenge that they had never faced before, not lack of water. They were going to be attacked by a fierce band of bloodthirsty cave dwellers, desert terrorists called Amalekites. These Amalekites lived in the lush valley of Rephidim. They, the Bible said, had no fear, not even of God. But the Israelites had to go through. The Amalekites were angry because they were coming in that direction. War was inevitable. God told Moses to climb a small mountain overlooking the valley of Rephidim. There, along with his brother Aaron and his cousin Hur, he would stretch out his hands in intercession while his young captain, Joshua, led the Israelites in the valley below. In my last journey to the Sinai, I climbed that same mountain, a natural overview called Mount Tahuna. It towers almost 1,000 feet over the valley below. There, I taught our small group. You'll notice on the summit where we were, the remnants of a small chapel built more than 1,000 years ago by pilgrims. Listen now and learn as we talk about authority. The weight of authority on the spiritual leader is far more than most people realize. When Moses got to this place, a valley called Rephidim, suddenly they came face to face with the first major battle that the children of Israel had had. For living in these caves all through this area were barbarians, cave people called Amalekites, the followers of Amalek, who was a barbarian chief, who refused to let them go through this valley, which was necessary as they would pass on to the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. And so a great battle took place in the floor of this valley. The Amalekites were trained soldiers, barbarians. The children of Israel were former slaves. They had never been in battle before. But God had a battle plan for His people. And so He told Moses to rise early in the morning and climb to the top of this mountain where I'm now standing, Mount Tahuna, overlooking the valley of Rephidim. And while he was there, he told Joshua, who was his young warrior, to lead the troops of Israel into battle against the Amalekites in the valley below. But it was more than just simply a battle plan, for God had something else in mind. He wanted Moses to come and stand on top of this mountain in the place of an intercessor. The place of leadership is far more than just one who raises the sword and raises the banner. But the leader also has to be an intercessor for behalf of his people. And so Moses came and stood on top of this mountain, standing between man below who was fighting the battle and God above, interceding on behalf of his friends, his followers. The rod, the staff, which had been Moses' constant companion, was to be held out over that valley. In fact, the scriptures say that as long as the rod was extended over the valley, that the battle went in favor of Israel. Only when Moses' arms grew weary and he dropped the rod did the battle go in favor of the Amalekites. And so Moses stood as an intercessor between the people below and in front of God so that the battle could go in favor of his followers. Jesus is our intercessor. He stands between us and God. We really don't have to do any fighting down here on this earth. That's for religious people. But for those of us who have known the fullness of God's Spirit, we can understand that we have a great intercessor who stands above us on the mountaintop, who does all of our battles and fighting for us, that Jesus and the very angels of heaven are actually doing the fighting in the heavenly places. All we have to do is cooperate with God, obey him, and walk in his decrees as he sets them forth. Another thing happened that morning while the battle was going on and as the day grew longer. Moses, who had his staff out and above his head, doing that which God had commanded him to do as the intercessor, his arms grew weary. He wasn't able to hold them out very long. Why don't we reenact this for just a few moments? Jack, why don't you come up here, and Len, you come up. The Bible says that Aaron and Hur, Moses' brother and his brother-in-law, came and helped him hold his arms up so that the battle could go in the direction of the Israelites rather than in the direction of the Amalekites. It's a perfect example of how we need one another. No leader can actually do his job unless his friends are around him, his Aarons and his Hurs. So I thank you, fellas, for being here to hold my hands up, just as God has told us to hold up the hands of all of his people every place.